We would start the proceedings and the session in next 2 minutes. Just stay muted. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world everyone is joining on. Thank you so much for joining in. Welcome to our 42nd edition of AIQRATE webinar special CXO series. And today, our guest is Indroneel Dutt. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Cleartrip.com. And we would be discussing a very interesting topic today because it's one topical, very contemporary, and absolutely relevant in today's time, which is about reimagining the new face of leadership. And it's all about laying out some strategic perspective. Before we start the session, I just would like to briefly introduce Indraneel. In fact, before the session, I had the opportunity to interact with him as a part of, I would say, discussions on around this session. And I must say, Indraneel brings a very interesting facet on something what I call a blend of finance, accounting, and business, because either you see the CFOs kind of a thing, or you see the business leader separate. But I think he's got a very interesting mix of business leadership as well as what I call running the whole end-to-end spectrum of finance and accounting. He's been associated as a CFO for Cleartrip for last 4 years, and previously he has held roles at TCS and eForce. He's also been an operating partner at one of a private equity fund, and he's an avid traveler in terms of his passion. And when we talk about his work, the body of the work, it encapsulates right in terms of leading large teams, handling large P&Ls, and also raising money for their organizations, and also looking at various M&A kind of investments, I would say. But more importantly, I think the perspective Indraneel will share will be more about today the changing facets and the paradigms about leadership. Just to get the ball rolling, Indraneel, I want to start something which is very, I would say, in today's time, everyone is talking about, specifically at a CXO and leadership level, is about the whole aspect of transformation, innovation, disruption. Now, if we take all these three dimensions together, it has an overarching appeal of change management. But in the scenario, this COVID situation, this black swan event, how do you see this whole transformation and innovation emerging in this disruptive times? What's the action leaders to really say what they should be doing? And is there anything which you believe should have been done in the hindsight, has not been attempted? So maybe something, and I'm trying to layer it up because it's a dense question, but would like to kind of start with that particular facet, please.
Absolutely. Samik, before we begin, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. Wonderful and wonderful experience. Very, very excited to have this and be part of this discussion, right? And I think you started it off well with a fairly you got straight to the to the absolute action-packed question, right? I think which kind of layered around what you defined as the three sort of cornerstones that is today defining the overarching change management that's going on, the transformation, innovation, and disruption, and how does leadership respond to that, right? Fundamentally, that was the question. And so if I were to kind of look at that perspective, transformation, if I were to look at these words individually, the transformation relies fundamentally on two cornerstones. One is innovation, of course, and the other is discipline. See, now more than ever, in a world which has been chaotic, to say the least, we need to embrace a disciplined form of working, right? And discipline is the only thing that persists between chaos and transformative performance. So the will to do and do it every day. Some of this might be as simple things as having a cadence, building an inclusive org with, obviously things are distributed, everybody's remote, So working through calls, keeping the interest levels up, making sure that the deliverables are recorded and acted upon properly. Or a lot of these might be fairly mundane and simple things, but together, discipline together with innovation is going to give you results. One, just discipline or just innovation may not give us what we are looking for. So in this era of change management, the first thing is having the will to do and do it every day, critically important. Let's come to the next thing, which is your innovation. Fundamentally, there is a difference between invention and innovation, right? What we are looking for here is upgrading or updating the things that we or something that already has been done, and that's the form of innovation that we that we need to build throughout the organization, and to do it, but do it differently. So what has to induce within the org is a common sense, a common sort of sense of urgency to manage this change, right? To enable this change. I mean, a lot of things have changed in our world. Overnight, we are all working from home. Overnight, we are all become experts in video conferencing. These are some of the very basic changes I'm talking about. Our products have changed. Our customers have changed. So unless the organization and the entire leadership team shares this sense of urgency, it's that transformative performance is not going to happen. And overlaying on top of all this is the leadership. What do people really look? How are you going to bring about this transformation? People look in times of crisis for authority, and people look for authenticity, right? So they want to know that which direction you're going towards, and that the direction that we are being led towards is a transparent, authentic direction. So the first step, I would say, in any change management is the ability of a leader to convey that they know that where they are going and how they know how to get there. The example that quickly sort of comes to mind is that of a lighthouse, right? A leader has to be like when a leader, I mean the inclusive of the leadership team, has to be like the beacon of the lighthouse, right? The lighthouse is providing a certain direction to the ship. It doesn't mean that we don't have to steer the ship like crazy. It just means that we continue to do what we are doing on our day-to-day work, but the three facets of change management is, doing it in a disciplined manner. The org should believe, and the leaders should believe too, that they know where they are going, which direction they are headed, to provide people a sense of both authenticity and direction, and sort of be like that lighthouse beacon where the entire org is rowing towards that one direction. I believe in times of disruption, which has presented itself to us in all forms of business, small or large, it's the paradigms are getting busted everywhere. Managing through this is critical with these sort of pillars of discipline, innovation, and having authoritative change management in place.
So let me pick up, and you gave a very nice rendition, Indroneel, about this changing dynamics in terms of how leaders need to kind of incorporate a new change. Now, I want to pick up discipline because you mentioned a few times, diligence, discipline. Help us explain today, because everything is virtual, remote work management, remote team management. Leaders cannot meet their teams. The teams are working in different kind of, let's say, locations. The schedules goes haywire. Now, at some level, this rigor, diligence, and discipline, how does it bind that whole aspect about working in the organization and giving it that particular navigation, what they were used to pre-COVID kind of, let's say, time? So can you shed some light on this, please?
It's a very, very interesting question, right? And one that I think all of us are sort of struggling at some level to find an accurate answer to, right? Let's zoom back, right? Let's dial back a couple of months, right? And you will see that things like board meetings, which which all of us are very used to attending once in a while. 90% of the decisions that get taken at a board meeting get taken outside the that specific meeting slot, because these are decisions that get taken on one-on-one. I would like to call it sidebar, but one-on-one conversations between the respective parties. Um, a lot of the policies that you see, a lot of the feedback, a lot of the employee, the ENPS or whatever, however you want to structure your the feedback cycle from the employees, happens over casual conversations, happens over a cup of coffee. And we are all familiar, those of us in the technology world are familiar with the massive power of the daily stand-ups that we used to have. Every day a 10-minute powwow, 10-minute talking to the team actually is an extremely productive mechanism. All that has changed. Today, all this has become virtual. We are trying to do some of that through meetings, through multiple video conferencing facilities, and so on and so forth. But it is so important to invest at an overarching level. I think the CTO's office has to lead this, right? How do you enable productivity in a distributed environment, in a virtual environment, right? Starting from, and discipline is an outcome, right? You have to enable people to say that, okay, this is what we, and the answer is not the same for every level in the organization, right? So you have to enable the organization to have that. The CTO's office has to enable the tools, the technology tools, to measure and enable remote working, right? Whether it's the physical infrastructure, whether it's the, obviously the data security and other infrastructure, that's the obvious one. But more importantly, how do you enable productivity? Building up 3 layers of firewalls is not the answer. The answer is, how do you enable productivity? How do you enable people with heavy files to work across shared domains? These I'm talking of the middle or the executive levels in the organization. At the senior levels, at the CXO levels, how do you perforce, how do you replace those little water cooler meetings that we used to have with the board members ahead of the meeting, and therefore get a sense of where their the tonality or the direction of that meeting is headed? Again, there has to be a massive amount of discipline that has to come into the leadership itself to say that, okay, pre-meetings, before the meetings, make sure that you set up one by one individual calls with the respective participants, get in their feedback so that you are not sort of getting into a meeting blindsided and having to deal with a lack of visual cue, which is so important in our decision making at a strategic level, right? So,
but if I may chime in, Indroneel, and you've touched a very relevant point. Now, you started with this sidebar conversations. Often leaders in the meetings, crucial ones, specifically critical ones, pre-meetings, they used to have these sidebar meetings or during the breaks, just to get a very firm understanding about which directions the meeting is going, what kind of decisions are anticipated or needs to be turned around basis those kind of, let's say, sidebar conversation. That's not happening. Second, I'm just trying to also build one more facet, which I would like to take your views, please. This whole aspect of stakeholder management. Going through those kind of a matrix organization, getting into, let's say, talking to those stakeholders used to be so easy in that kind of an era. Now I'm talking about that era because it's good 120 days ahead of us.
Yeah, I know.
How this scenario will looking like, because we don't seem to be having an end to this in terms of how this virtual thing will go away. Pretty much it's not happening soon. So how do you envisage this whole thing now? Stakeholder management, those coffee discussions, sidebar conversation. Tell us what's the new template would look like.
Look, let's look at what or who are the stakeholders in our management, right? We've got stakeholders in the organization. We've got clearly the employees, the shareholders, the customers, and the vendors, right? So I think the first thing you do is, before you look out, look within. Let's fix, how do we communicate to the org, right? And there are multiple layers of communication. There are multiple levels of communication in the org, right? Like you said, having those daily stand-up meetings, how can we replace them virtually, right? How do we, how do we ensure that the organization is all rowing towards that same marker, right? For example, and this is a great time to remind everybody in the org, and we don't do this often. This is a great time to remind everybody in the org, why did we start this product? How did it change? What were the founding principles of this company? Take a step back, think about it, and how has it changed in today's world? If you reinvigorate the organization by just reminding them, this is why we started, this is why we exist today, and this is why we will exist tomorrow, right? Getting that message across to the org is supremely important. Now, once you've done that, and again, that can have its, you obviously have to have a very, very clear path and vision in order to do that. Once you've done that, now go back to your most important stakeholder, which is your customer, right? And at one point, at all levels, our business, our customers have been impacted. Sometimes, perhaps with what should I say? There has been a lack of consumer confidence in our market, and while we wait for that to return, the customer has to be, over communicate with the customer to tell them that, look, we are here, we realize there is a crisis, we are in trouble, and I'm sure you're in trouble. It's fine. I have not come here to sell you anything, but I'm just come here to tell you that, we are as resolute and confident as ever to service you today, tomorrow, and once this is over behind us, and we are sure that this is going to get over. That's when you now focus, and a similar, right? Exact similar messaging goes to your vendors, and that's when and after that, you come and focus on your fourth stakeholder, which is your shareholders, right? And of course, these treatments are different for people who are not managing to the street. The street understands today. The board understands that there is a problem, right? And that's what boards are there for. They will be supportive, right? Again, as a matter of discipline, understand that they are also going through this with you. There is no playbook here. In a lot of cases, they also don't know the answers. What they are looking for is crisp, authentic, transparent communication with them before the meetings to say, look, this is why we are doing what we are doing. And this is why I believe this is the right thing to do, right? And if there is a counter view to that, let's take in that view, let's discuss it and come to a conclusion. Again, I believe that the power of communication, it's so powerful, right? That's these 5-10 minute pre-meetings and going through these thought processes with various individuals helps us sharpen our sort of our ideas, the way they evolve, and therefore the organization then, the organization direction then emerges from that evolution.
Right. And also, I think you mentioned about the boards and all, and you rightly said, since there is no template or a playbook, it's very essential for the leaders, CXOs and board to be more acceptable around that, look, this is a new reality, and some of these clarifications, some of these templates, playbooks will emerge in the time to come. Having said that, there is also a aspect about what today we are saying, that organizations who have gone through making their business plan, and of course, I remember talking to many of the folks before the beginning of 2020. Everyone went gaga over, oh, let's build 3 years, 5 years plan. And today, it seems improbable those plans will see any light of the day. In your scenario, in your opinion, how do you think the leaders should approach now, given that those plans have become very awry and absolutely astray? How do you think they should now look at building a new set of plan for their organization?
I've been building a lot of versions of our annual operating plan. Trust me on this one. So I can totally relate to what you're saying.
So maybe sidebar, I'll ask you how many versions you have created of that.
I know. That is exactly. I absolutely will tell you. But okay. So I guess let me take a step back again. Right?
Sure.
Fundamentally, today we are in the eye of the storm, literally. And it doesn't seem that there is any end to this, right, today. again, if you believe long term, we are going to get over this. Everything has a finite shelf life, right? We are going to look back. I can tell you from travel industry data, and this is something I've been studying, right? I don't have data for the Spanish flu, but I have data for 2008 financial crisis, the SARS of 2003, the MERS of 2015, the SARS of whatever. And everywhere I have seen that it returns to at least, 130% plus, or, almost a 1/3 within 2 quarters recovery period. Once I can tell you the moment what will happen is there is a positive news about a, vaccine trial. The shared optimism will rebound and the demand will return into the economies, right? And once you have shared optimism, that is what induces consumer buying behavior. That is an industry that I track, and obviously that's our bread and butter. But in all of this, I think the fundamental question that we have to sort of drill down on is that there's only one question we need to answer as leaders: how will our product change? And I touched upon this briefly when I was speaking. But our CXO strategy has to address that, right? That once you put the marker on the ground that, look, there are X possible dimensions our product can change through, you eliminate the dead ends and then channelize every resource in the company to build like crazy towards that, right? Fundamentally, that's the way I believe it has to happen. I mean, I'll give you an example. In travel, the industry I'm in, the biggest change that we anticipate is that trust is going to be a huge marker for the people going forward. Right? So it is no longer a vacation. The first thing you want to look is for a safecation. Right? Is it safe to travel? And at least for the next year or 2 years, that's what we believe, that it will be on top of people's minds, right? So in order to remain on TOMA, what you call the top of mind awareness, you got to focus on the product change. You build crazily to implement that change. And then once you figure out this direction that you want to take, then the cavalry has to come in. The technology teams have to come in to give real estate, portal at the website. The operations team has to enable that, that multi reviews. Bringing to the marketing engine has to come in to sort of bring together a complete, what should I say, analogous supply chain, as well as the pitching of that. The marketing optimization of that trust marker, right? Everybody's going to be searching for that. How do you ensure that it is on top of people's mind, and therefore you are being relevant to what the consumer is thinking today?
Yeah. No, very aptly said. And in fact, when you were narrating this particular thing, I picked up some words: trust, safety, hygiene, and specifically in the context of travel and hospitality industry. Now, these three things, it's not that it wasn't there, but they've come in the forefront today. And the companies within the travel hospitalities are trying to just kind of create that new customer experiences around these attributes, which will also kind of spawn new kind of operating rhythm. Where it also coaxes, in a way, or rather nudges the CXO in a way to kind of really challenge the status quo. Because if this is something what will stay for some time, and maybe things will improve, but at some level, we are talking about also managing growth and scale vectors. It's important to kind of bake in those attributes and say, look, this is how some of these new attributes, maybe safety, trust, as you said, hygiene, needs to come in. Absolutely well said. Great.
Absolutely.
One of the, and I just want to shift gears, Indroneel, and move to something which is also pertinent when we talk about this, the new phase of leadership. Now, the fact in every segment of industry today, not specific to one, but to be agnostic, is we've got a lot of young workforce today, millennials, Gen Z, baby boomers, as we call it. Then we also have gig workers, contractual workforce, a lot of freelancers. And then we are talking about these shared workplaces, the likes of the WeWorks or the other kind of, let's say, shared workplaces and all. Now, this particular model, a new talent and a new kind of, let's say, work environment. also needs to be kind of enabled by the management and the leaders today to kind of give a very firm kind of a message to the entire workforce and the organization. Look, that it's not about a generation gap, it's about an inclusive and a very engaging kind of a, let's say, workforce. How do you think leaders need to adapt to this? Because it's not seemingly easy. There is a age, there is a new kind of a, let's say, talent workforce which is not loyal to one employer, to multiple maybe today. So how do you see that leaders grappling with this particular thing?
I mean, it's a very, very interesting question, right? I think the first thing that we have to do as leaders, right? One of the first things that we have to do as leaders is to get fresh pair of eyes to look at the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in this very strongly. I don't think anybody individually has the answers to all of the questions. I don't even think they know some of what the questions are in a lot of cases, right? So if we don't have answers because we don't have a playbook, right? You said sometime earlier in our discussion, there is no playbook. So therefore, we are as good as a much more, I would say, somebody with a fresh pair of eyes, young leaders, young talent that has come up within the organization, and every organization has these, right, in varying degrees. Encourage and include that leadership, that younger leadership, to kind of, and when I say younger, not just by age, but also by experience, because whatever experience we've had is frankly not relevant, right? So therefore, get them in with a fresh pair of eyes to say that, okay, nobody has the right answers individually, but let's see if we can collectively come out with the right direction. As part of that, I think the senior leadership team has to shed a lot of inhibitions, right? There is a lot of inhibitions that we have about sharing, right? Our previous monolithic organizations are now passé, right? What we have to do is that we have to move from what is called, the church. If you look at the church, that's sort of the largely a very sort of a monolithic organization, right?
Right.
From that to literally to a bazaar model, to where there are multiple shops, there are multiple customers, and therefore what we say that if you don't shed your inhibitions about sharing, what you perceive as business secrets, the way you did employment contracts, the face of the employee must change. Location will no longer be a constraint. Where you store data, how you store data, everything is going to change. Everything is going to be distributed. Pretty much the old medieval ideas of hoarding, right? Where you had a proprietary access to knowledge, information, wealth, power, all that is gone today. Everything will be available more or less to the same set of brilliant minds will be available to the people at large. The question is, within that, you have to figure out what your core nucleus, your core IP is, and try and build basically your products around it, so that the distributed framework essentially combines itself to build upon a product that has changed the product for tomorrow. So, I mean, just to elaborate for one more minute, sort of identify the virtuality in your business. Every business is going to go virtual or is going virtual in this time, and it's not going to change back pretty soon. What is invest in workforce management, shed those inhibitions, what you erstwhile perceived as your business secrets, and you wanted people to sit in from 10 to 5, and all that is going to change now. So the question is, how can you make that workforce agile, mobile, and get your product out there? And that's what I think is going to define great companies from good companies.
No, aptly said, because this thing around church to a bazaar model and virtualization of the businesses, definitely, to your point, will status quo, because we're not just talking about a business model getting reoriented or reimagined. We are also talking about leadership needs to come out with the new playbooks, new facets of how they need to kind of manage the workforce and the business. And not to forget, there is always that very close or keen eyes in terms of how the company needs to perform on various business parameters, because eventually it's a matter of survival and relevance as well. Now, over there, if we look, I mean, today, and I just want to have a build up to this question, and it's more like a very agnostic view I'm trying to ask you, Indroneel. Do you see a gap in terms of leaders generally, and this is not specific to one organization? Do you see a gap today where leaders are not able to reach to this particular set of attributes we are talking about, or you believe it's happening in patches and they're trying to kind of look at reorienting themselves, or you still believe it's way out in terms of they not even anticipating this thing?
It's a mixed bag, right? I mean, I think, as I said, right, I think the leaders of today have to sort of look through and redefine their product. This redefinition, right, of what this, and I keep referring to the product in my discussion, which is and in my everyday life, but fundamentally it doesn't matter. Product could be a service, it could be the business, it could be whatever you are out there selling, right? In so many words, is according to me the most important thing in the existence of the company. Everything else is just enablers, right? So if you look at your core product and say that, look, there is a set of short-term objectives I need to fill, there is a set of medium-term objectives, and there is a sort of a longer-term view that we have to take. Now, as leaders, you've got to figure out where do you fit in that slot. Are you taking a short-term view, a medium-term, or you're kind of looking at the long-term view? It's important for the organization to take a holistic view, right? But so I wouldn't say that leaders are getting left behind. There might be some leaders in this process who say that, look, I just haven't figured out that long-term vision. That's fine. You can stay focused on the stage one. Let there be others, and preferably this is probably the CEO that takes care of the third horizon, right? And we'll talk about it in a, let there be others who will take care of that longer term vision. But the organization, the overall leadership has to be an interesting mixture of, or rather not interesting, but a judicious mixture of having these multiple sort of areas of focus, right? Horizons of focus, short term, medium term, long term, which together then builds up the cumulative goal of the organization. And today's leadership, I see a lot of them as sort of vacillating between the short and the medium term. I don't think anybody sort of figured out a lot of people haven't really figured out what is the, what's the long-term priority? How is that going to change? And perhaps it's too short a time, right? Giving somebody 2 months to say that, okay, now let's throw away every version of the business plan that you've ever known and start drawing on the white paper. It's perhaps too much to ask for people as well.
True. I want to take a question, and it's a very relevant question which has come in, because I think we can break that mold as what we are saying, maybe we'll kind of practice as well. And I want, for this particular question, Indraneel, you to be wearing your CFO hat. More specifically, the question is about today, organizations are...
I've got a hat here, which I can wear if you want, nevertheless.
So the question is about this whole aspect of two set of challenges. On one side is a challenge where the company needs to transform, innovate, drive a lot of this digital agenda. On the other side, they're grappling with the working capital issues, repayment of their existing loan, or the funding running dry. kind of thing, irrespective of whatever stage the company is. It could be even a startup. And seemingly, they are also staring at a possible kind of solvency issue. Now, as a CFO, what's your advice in terms of directionally setting up strategic priority for this kind of an organization?
Okay. I'm perhaps going to simplify my answer a little bit, but this is an extremely poignant question, the one that is bothering the CFOs as well as the CEOs of every organization, regardless of the stature and size of it, right? And I'm thinking through my answer here. If you're a startup, there is only one mantra that I would like to go by. Please, please don't run out of cash. Everything, whatever you do, and I'm not defining a startup as, I'm saying anybody who's got that level of solvency issues, and the question referred to, if you're having working capital or repayment issues or solvency issues, do everything within your power by cutting costs, by bringing forward some of the customer advances, do whatever you have to do, by going in from the board for an emergency round of funding, do whatever you have to do, but please don't run out of cash. If you cut the burn, you will get through this crisis. There will be a time for expansion, product mix, all of that. I know it sounds counterintuitive to what I said, but the biggest strength of the startup is agility and speed and their speed of innovation. And fundamentally you say that, look, even if I have to throw the kitchen sink at it, so be it, right? Let us not worry about unit economics. But in times such as these, the biggest thing to preserve more than your IP is to preserve your cash. And fundamentally, I have seen this in so many instances, in the 2002 .com bust in the US, etc. I have seen that IP walks out of the door overnight when you run out of cash, right? So I cannot be more blunt than this. For established players, which know that, look, come what may, we are gonna survive, we are gonna do well, or they have a board and perhaps a street to manage. While the core principles remain the same, please understand that everybody has been reset in the crisis, right? And again, if you do not induce that sense of urgency into working capital management, into sort of making sure that you strike the right deals with the banks for repayment of your loans, or try and bring forward those receivables that you were supposed to collect from your from your customers, and most importantly, reduce your losses. See, today, in certain cases, people have started wearing losses as a badge of honor, right? In a lot of the cases that we know about and a lot of companies that we know about, that's not going to happen now. Capital will get scarcer. And so whatever you have, please preserve it, whether it's for the startup or even the sort of the established players. Capital, once it gets scarcer, even for larger companies, it has to be sweated more. It will become more accountable, right? The board and the investors will demand that level of accountability, and you will see those effects in your share, in your stock prices, if you do not manage that short-term horizon of working capital management and sort of repayment on loans. So I would, if you were to stack, and I would go as far as to say, if you were to ask me to stack rank it, I would stack rank that first, over and above transformation, innovation, or any other agenda that you want to drive in the company.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, I think that's helpful. That should give, I think, enough viewpoints about what they should be doing at this stage. Now, switching back to the original discussion, Indroneel, and I want to toss up few attributes: resilience, empathy, agility, storytelling. Now, I think if we go back to our days, these set of attributes were never talked about. But today, as you rightly said, with the workforce we are all working with, as in the young, very kind of a, let's say, upbeat workforce, suddenly these attributes have become in the forefront. They are at the fulcrum of the, I would say, demonstration. But again, going back to the leaders, how do they start kind of exhibiting these attributes, and what they should do to kind of showcase these attributes?
And I'm sorry, the attributes were resilience,
resilience, empathy, agility, storytelling, and there are more others as well.
empathy,
But I just took some
yeah,
3 or 4 off the book.
understood, understood. No, I get the drift, I get the sense of your question, right? So again, as I said, right, the monolithic organization is now passé, right? So what has happened is, for lack of a better word, right, the entire world is moving towards disintermediation, right? Right, and I don't know whether I said that. I mean, I'm still searching for a better word for it, but I think disintermediation spells it accurately, right? You will have access, and you and everybody else will have access to the same set of people, data, storage, at a very broad level, right? In the same set of brilliant minds that are writing code for everywhere else. Within that, how do you build an organization that is resilient? How do you build an organization that is quickly adaptive, right? Your IP, it's there is I think the atom describes it the best. Please focus on the nucleus, right? Get the nucleus, the electrons will keep revolving around itself. And if you build the nucleus tightly enough, you will see that the electrons are not going out of the orbit, right?
Say that again, please. I think it's a very important point you touch. Say that again, please.
I said that, you build your nucleus well, right? Focus on that absolute core IP of your organization, whatever that might be, right? And just like that nucleus holds together through its binding gravitational force the electrons that circle around it at various orbits, that could be your customers, that could be your gig employees, your contractors, whatever, right? Whatever, however you want to call it. If you hold that core IP with you, within that core team of the organization, you will see that suddenly the organization has become extremely resilient. Now, a resilience in today's definition is not that I can go through every set of adversity without failing. The resilience is, how can I fail quickly, keep shipping, fall down, get up, keep shipping, right? That's fundamentally the definition of resilience today, right? How can I fail fast and move on to the next thing, right? And within that, and obviously, so that you can probably guess that resilience and agility in today's day is tied at the hip, right? You've got to be an agile organization, right? You've got to depend on. So you break up your organization, explode it into the core nucleus, which has to remain within you. That is your IP. That is what you sell. That is why you started the company, or that is why the division has evolved, and that is what your investors have laid faith in. So hold on to that core IP. Everything else, let it revolve around you. People will come and go. Contributors will come and go. That's fine. And that will help you, because if you try to focus on that entire monolithic structure, you will not be able to. If you try to focus on the nucleus, that's what will give you resilience, because you know that you hold that piece strong to your heart, right? So you're breaking down the problem, if you will, and then adding on layers of agility. And you touched upon something very important, empathy, right? This today, I believe that this is going to become the most important leadership criteria for the next 2 years. And let me ramble on for a minute more, but I think this is important. Everybody today, if I talk to a lot of people, both outside, my bankers, our investors and everybody, a lot of people are talking about, the boardrooms are essentially abuzz with conversations around, we got to cut costs, we got to lay off people, we got to, do this and that and save costs and go virtual, all of that good stuff. The 90% of the workforce, whether it's up to the, right at the individual level, is thinking of none of these things. They're all worried at one level. They all care about the company, but there is a lot of individual. I don't want to call it fear, but there is a lot of individual anxiety which people are going through today. Right? They care about whether their neighbor has COVID or not. They care about whether they're going to get a hospital bed in today's scenario or not. what has the organization done to allay the fears? What has the organization done to come forward, extend that help and say that, look, we care, right? It's not, yes, it's definitely about the product, it's about the business, it's about all of that. But overarching on top of that, it's about you. Make it personal, right? It is about you. Again, I think putting together that structured framework in every organization. I don't think this is a government problem. I don't think this is an individual problem. None of us can solve it. We know that, right?
True.
Every organization, if they come together in their own way to help and to basically it's just like that, sort of put the foot on the ground and say that, look, we are there rightly and solidly behind you, right? I think it will mean a world of difference. And that is where empathy, not just sort of the real empathy, right? That is where you demonstrate that I am an empathetic organization, and therefore, therefore you sort of, now you create a workforce that is saying, wow, somebody's got my back. And you will find that they are much more receptive and going over and beyond their call of duty to ensure the success of the organization. That's my view.
Well, I think I must say this, two things, very fascinating in terms of the viewpoints, what you said, Indroneel. One, this whole analogy of nucleus and electrons, I think, yes, very well, I would say, relevant at this stage. And second, this employee well-being, as you said, in dimension of the empathy attribute, because today, this is where the leadership needs to stand out and clearly call out employee well-being as a rallying cry and say, look, this is where the rubber hits the road. We are there because of the employees, because of the workforce, and whatever said and done, as you rightly said, personalized kind of an attention or that communication is required to ensure that they are well taken care of. Now, brilliant, I would say, points, in fact, and very true in this kind of a topical situation. A very different viewpoint, and this is one of the questions which has also come in, is about a sense of this technology orientation. Today, we have an explosion of these new exponential technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cybersecurity, IoT. Now, these technologies weren't there 5 years back, 6 years back. Suddenly they've come and have become kind of even a boardroom discussion. In your view, do leaders need to really internalize these technologies, or you believe they should know it, but they should also know it how to kind of take what is required and leave out what is not required in terms of execution per se? What's your view on, rather, let me simplify in terms of a question. What's the relevance for leaders around these new age exponential technologies?
I mean, the leaders of today, like these technologies, as you rightly said, right? These were in laboratories 5 years ago, right? Computer science laboratories, computer science labs 5 years ago. 5 years later, this will become commodity. Every technology will go through a shelf life. Every technology will go through an evolution cycle, right? Of course, it's getting more and more advanced as we go along on an annual basis. But again, I come back. To me, technology is great. The only thing I have to focus is, we also know that, look, in today's day and age, your product has to go digital, right? If you're, so I am saying, let's just leave technology aside for a minute. Focus on digitalization of your product to the core, right? Not how you sell it. It's not the latest CRM or not the latest blockchain that I'm talking about. It is what you sell, right? Focus on your service or your product and digitalization to the core using technology, right? If you do not do that, you will be left aside, right? So to that extent, when you are digitalizing your product, leaders have to understand and embrace that technology, or even if they don't understand, they have to understand the product and the attributes or the advantages it brings, right? After that, everything else to me is an enabler, right? Whether it is AI, whether it is a blockchain, all of these they were buzzwords yesterday. They are industry, they have become integrated into the framework today. A lot of work on the RPA front, and in a finance function that I am in, we are using a lot of RPA work to automate some of the earlier reconciliation processes, etc. But our core product, again, look, the fact remains that we are a born digital company, right? The Cleartrip is a born digital company, so I understand and relate to that world very well. But for the leaders who are coming in from a what should I say, from the good old world, if you will, I don't think that everybody has to become an AI expert. I at least I certainly do not see the need for that. AI will become an enabler, just as email was an enabler 20 years back. AI will become an enabler 5 years hence, right? The people and that's the way, if you look at all these behemoths, whether it's a Google, whether it's a Microsoft, whether it's any of these larger organizations, the way they're writing their big queries and their data engines and all that is that, you put in your organization data, we will give you the natural insight, we will do the ML, we will do the AI. So it's becoming technology as a service, right? It's fundamentally, they are saying AI as a service.
Correct.
Everything is moving to a service, on-demand service model. And therefore, I believe that for the leaders, I don't think they need to get worried about the basic factors of digitalization of your product, empathizing with your lead, sort of your fellow employees, and taking care of people. Dealing with your partners, investors, and customers. None of that has changed, and none of that.
So on the same side, and you made a good point on this, there is also a bit of anxiety and a bit of fear and rather concern that AI or automation will also displace jobs. How true, in your sense, you see that? And for leadership, if these are the concerns which are emanating within the organization, how they should kind of mitigate or assuage these kind of concerns?
Frankly, I am reminded of that almost the time that I was, probably right out of college or even in school. There was this whole chaos in India going on in the public sector areas where they said computerization will take away jobs. I don't know if, a lot of people who are, probably about the 20 plus years of experience will be chuckling with me at this point of time. But
I'm one of them as well.
So it never does, right? You've got to. So what will happen is that you have to reskill. You have to upskill. You have to reskill. You have to retool yourself. But I do not think that machines will come and run our world. That is not going to happen. Well, at least for the next 5 years or 10 years that I have visibility on, right? What will happen though in your business, and I refer to this, this reminds me of a very interesting analogy, right? That I had read. I think it was Cognizant, most probably, that had come up in their annual report in 2000, after the 2008 financial crisis, when everything was, very similar situation, right? There was no playbook. Things had just melted overnight. They had come out with an annual report which was titled "Shining Through the Fog." It's like, you got a lot of mist in front of you. How do you shine through the fog? What are the things that you do? And I alluded to this earlier in my conversation where I said that, look, let's break down the problems into horizons of focus, right? There is a immediate cash flow horizon. There is a medium-term horizon, and then there is the long-term horizon, right? If you believe that, do two things, right? One is focus a portion of the company on the long-term horizon where you believe that this is where the future is. Do things that you believe that the technology, the product will evolve to, right? The medium and the immediate horizon is equally important, right? There that, look, this is the product that I'm selling today. Let us make these sort of, I wouldn't call it cosmetic, but let us make those necessary changes to be relevant in the post-COVID world to go out and sell these, right? And all of this has to come in using a certain layer of AI, a certain layer of technology. Give me the insights. Fundamentally, this is again, I don't want to refer to cliches, but like they say, right, data is the new oil, right? Well, if you do not have insight, I mean, how are you going to change, right? What are you going to sell? The only way you're going to do that is if you got the insights you need. Where is that insight going to come from? Without the AI and your analytics engines, you're going to be running blind, literally. Now you're running on hunch. The day of hunch is over. There's vast treasure troves of information that lies within your organization, past data. Mine it, use it to run not just your CTO's office, to run the CFO's office, to run the COO's office. And that's how you will, you will keep hitting your numbers quarter on quarter, because now you're being relevant to what the customer is looking for, as opposed to what you're building and putting it out there. So that's my.
You mentioned about CFO. There is a question over there. I mean, specific again to this relevant time, that what do you envisage the role of CFO to be in the time to come? It's seen a genre change over the last 20 years, and you've been into this professional sphere for a long time. But from here, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, how do you see the CFO role emerging?
I think, and I say this tongue in cheek, right? The CFO's role has to emerge into a CBO role. That is
CBO role, okay.
A chief business officer. The CFO has to be a complement to the CEO, right? Not a supplement, but a complement to the CEO. Basically, building upon the agility, the speed of that sense of urgency I referred to, which a CEO brings to the table, and saying that, look, these are the guardrails, right? So the CFO's office should act as a guardrail towards building upon that resilient order, right? And more and more, the ERP systems will get evolved, the accounting systems will get evolved, the calls that, today a lot of the CFOs work has already been, is already being done efficiently by systems, right? If you look at some of the accounting standards, the way they are evolving, a lot of that, right? A lot of that will become commonplace. So if you want to stay relevant, if a CFO wants to stay relevant, the only way for that, in my view, is to become the CBO of the organization, right? Where you are the chief business officer, you are constantly telling the CEO and the rest of the leadership team that, look, guys, these are the avenues that you want to go down. If you go down, this is what is going to happen. Financially, this is what it means to us. This is how the working capital ties in. This is how the cash ties in. And these are the markets, these are the market attributes. These are the insights I'm getting from our data team. Putting that entire perspective together in front of the leadership team is an invaluable tool for decision making. And only the CFO has the ability to do that, or sort of encompass that. So I would strongly encourage, at least that's what certainly I am doing in my own career journey, to try and become a business officer as opposed to just a financial officer.
Awesome. Must say, a very engrossing, engaging, and fascinating discussion. First, a CFO can be a CBO as well. I mean, I truly kind of believe, I think what you said makes sense, because no one is closer to the game in the industry as close as like a CFO, and he or she needs to really play a kind of a complementary aspect to the CEO. But must say, in the last 60 minutes, I think the spectrum of the themes, what you covered, were riveting, because there is no one set answer to all these things what we were actually talking about. But the way I think you elaborated and also clarified some of the myths which exist today in terms of what the CXO should not be doing, and also embracing the new normal of this reality, the virtualization, the whole nucleus and the electron analogies. And I would say that you punctuated your narrative with a lot of these analogies, anecdotes, idioms, and adages, because I think that's where the relevance in terms of our audience comes in, where they are able to relate. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's a very, very, I would say, absorbing and very fascinating conversation. Love talking to you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. All the best. Take care.